The desert heat was suffocating that morning in Afghanistan, but it wasn't the temperature that made my hands shake as I gripped my M4. It was the sound of incoming mortars getting closer and the sight of Sergeant Martinez collapsing behind the concrete barrier we'd been using for cover. I was just a private first class then, barely 21, from a small town in Ohio where the biggest excitement was Friday night football games. 6 months into my deployment, I thought I knew what war looked like. I was wrong. Contact left, Johnson screamed over the radio static, his voice cracking with the kind of panic that spreads like wildfire through a unit. We were pinned down in what was supposed to be a routine patrol through the village of Khost. Intelligence said the area was clear. Intelligence was dead wrong. The Taliban fighters had set up a perfect ambush. They knew exactly where we'd take cover, exactly how we'd react. As bullets whistled overhead and kicked up dust clouds around our position, I pressed myself against the wall so hard I thought my ribs might crack. That's when I saw Martinez trying to crawl toward better cover, blood seeping through his uniform from a shrapnel wound in his shoulder. Our squad leader for 8 months, the guy who'd kept us alive through 3 previous firefights, was down. And suddenly, the 12 men who'd been following his orders were looking around like lost children. "Where's the LT?" Corporal Williams shouted, referring to our lieutenant, who was supposed to be coordinating with the other squads. "Still back at the Humvees with the radio," someone yelled back. The enemy fire was intensifying. Through the chaos, I could hear them shouting to each other in Pashto, coordinating their positions. They were trying to flank us from the east while keeping us pinned from the north. In about 3 minutes, we'd be surrounded. Martinez managed to prop himself against the wall next to me, his face pale but his eyes still sharp. Blood was running down his arm, but he was more focused on the tactical situation than his wound. "Listen to me," he said, grabbing my collar with his good hand. His voice was steady despite the pain. "See that building at 2 o'clock? The one with the blue door?" I nodded, trying to ignore the bullets impacting just feet from our heads. "That's where most of their fire is coming from. If we don't take it out in the next 2 minutes, they're going to have us completely surrounded." He winced as another mortar exploded nearby. "You see the problem?" I did see it. The building was about 50 meters away, across open ground. Getting there would mean exposing ourselves to fire from at least 3 different positions. It was a suicide run, unless... "We need to coordinate," I said, the tactical training finally kicking in through my fear. Suppressive fire from Williams and Jackson, smoke grenades to cover the approach, and a flanking maneuver from the south. Martinez looked at me with something that might have been surprise or maybe relief. "That's exactly right, but I can't lead it with this shoulder." He looked around at the other guys. Williams was competent, but had never led anything bigger than a fire team. Jackson was too new. Henderson was solid, but had already taken a graze to his leg and was limping. Then Martinez looked back at me, and I saw something in his expression that made my stomach drop. "You're up, Collins. Take my place." I stared at him. "Sarge, I'm just a PFC. These guys aren't going to..." "They will if you give them a reason to." Another explosion, closer this time. "Look around you. Half these men are from small towns just like yours. They're scared, they're confused, and they need someone to tell them what to do. It doesn't matter what rank is on your collar if you can get them home alive. The thing about moments that change your life is that they don't feel dramatic when they're happening. There's no swelling music, no slow motion revelation. There's just a choice, and you make it because the alternative is worse." I looked at my squad, guys I'd shared MREs with, complained about the heat with, written letters home with. Johnson, 19 years old, whose girlfriend had just sent him a Dear John letter. Williams, who had 3 kids back in Detroit and showed their pictures to anyone who'd listen. Henderson, who'd saved my ass during a night patrol 2 weeks earlier when I'd almost walked into a tripwire. They were looking at me now, and I realized Martinez was right. They needed someone to make a decision. Any decision was better than paralysis. "All right," I said, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. "Here's what we're going to do." I explained the plan quickly, assigning roles, making sure everyone understood their part. The suppressive fire team would lay down cover while Henderson and I made the flanking approach. Once we got to the alley behind the Blue Door building, we'd signal, and Jackson would throw smoke to cover our final approach. "What if it doesn't work?" Johnson asked. and I could hear the fear in his voice. "Then we adapt," I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. "But doing nothing isn't an option. They're moving to surround us right now." As if to emphasize my point, we started taking fire from a new direction, the east, just as I'd predicted. Martinez nodded at me. "You've got this, Collins. Trust your training, trust your instincts, and trust your men." I took a deep breath, tasting dust and cordite. In 30 seconds, I was going to step out from behind this wall and lead 11 men across a battlefield. 6 months ago, I'd been bagging groceries at the Piggly Wiggly in Marietta, Ohio. "Ready?" I called out. A chorus of "Ready!" came back, and for the first time since the shooting started, I felt something other than fear. I felt purpose. I stepped into formation at the head of my squad, Martinez's words echoing in my head. "Take my place? Time to find out what I was made of." "Go! Go! Go!" The word left my mouth before I had time to second-guess myself. Williams and Jackson opened up with everything they had, their M4s chattering in controlled bursts toward the Blue Door building. The sound was deafening, but it was our sound, organized, purposeful. I sprinted across the first 10 meters of open ground with Henderson right behind me, my boots kicking up clouds of dust with each step. The Taliban fighters had been caught off guard by our sudden aggression. For maybe 5 seconds, their return fire was scattered and poorly aimed. Those 5 seconds saved our lives. We made it to a low stone wall that ran parallel to the main street. I could hear Henderson breathing hard beside me, but when I looked over, he gave me a thumbs up despite the blood still seeping through his pants leg. "Phase 1 complete," I radioed back to Williams, initiating flanking maneuver. The formal military language felt strange coming out of my mouth, but it worked. I could hear the confidence in my own voice, and more importantly, I could see it in Henderson's eyes. He believed I knew what I was doing. Hell, maybe I was starting to believe it myself. We low-crawled along the wall for about 20 meters, the sound of gunfire creating a constant backdrop. Every few seconds, I'd risk a quick glance over the wall to check our progress. The Blue Door building was getting closer, but so was the sound of enemy voices. "Collins," Henderson whispered. "I count at least 4 tangos in that building, maybe more." I peeked over the wall again. He was right. Through the windows, I could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions. These weren't just random fighters. They were organized, disciplined. They'd turned that building into a fortress. That's when I heard something that made my blood run cold. The distinctive sound of an RPG being loaded. "RPG! RPG!" I screamed into my radio, just as a rocket-propelled grenade streaked across the battlefield toward our original position. It impacted the wall where we'd been taking cover just 30 seconds earlier, sending chunks of concrete flying like shrapnel. If we'd stayed put, we'd all be dead. "Jesus Christ," Henderson muttered. "How did you know they were going to flank us?" I didn't have an answer for that. Maybe it was the tactical training, or maybe it was just common sense born from 6 months of trying to stay alive. Either way, we were in a better position now than we had been. "Jackson, you copy?" I called into my radio. "Copy, Collins. What's your status?" "We're in position for the final approach. On my mark, throw smoke and shift fire to the eastern windows. We're going in through the back." There was a pause. "Roger that. You sure about this?" Was I sure? Hell no. But I was learning that leadership wasn't about being sure. It was about making decisions when nobody else would. Positive. 30 seconds. Henderson and I moved into position behind a burnt-out car that sat maybe 15 meters from the back of the building. From here, I could see that the rear entrance was unguarded. They'd put all their fighters on the side facing our original position. "Ready?" I asked Henderson. He checked his magazine, winced as he shifted his wounded leg, then nodded. "Let's do this. Jackson, mark, mark, mark!" The smoke grenade detonated perfectly, creating a thick gray cloud that obscured the entire front of the building. At the same time, Williams shifted his fire toward the eastern windows, forcing the Taliban fighters to take cover. Henderson and I broke from our concealment and sprinted toward the back door. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst, but my mind was crystal clear. This was what all the training had been for, not just the tactical stuff, but the mental preparation to function under extreme stress. We reached the door without taking fire. I pressed my back against the wall beside it while Henderson positioned himself on the other side. Through the thin wooden door, I could hear voices arguing in Pashto. They were realizing that their position was being compromised. I held up 3 fingers to Henderson. 3, 2, 1. I kicked the door in and went through low while Henderson came in high. The first room was empty except for some old furniture and ammunition crates, but I could hear movement from the next room, the one facing our squad's position. We moved through the building like we'd done it 100 times before, even though this was my first time leading a room-clearing operation. Henderson followed my lead without question, covering my movements with precision that spoke to months of training together. The next room contained 2 Taliban fighters who were so focused on the battle outside that they didn't hear us coming. It was over in seconds, but it was the 3rd room, the main firing position, where things got complicated. When we breached that door, we found 4 fighters with weapons trained on the windows, plus 1 man who was clearly the leader, judging by how the others deferred to him. He was older, maybe in his 40s, with the kind of calm demeanor that suggested he'd been doing this for a long time. The moment we entered, he turned toward us with an AK-47, and I found myself staring down the barrel of his weapon. Time slowed down in that weird way it does in life or death situations. I could see the man's finger tightening on the trigger. I could hear Henderson shouting something beside me. I could smell the gunpowder and sweat and fear. And in that split second, I realized something that would stick with me for the rest of my life. Being a leader means being willing to put yourself between your people and the danger they face. I didn't think about it, I just moved. If you've ever been in a situation where split-second decisions mean the difference between life and death, you know what I'm talking about. Tell me in the comments where you're watching this from. I'd love to know where this story is reaching people who understand what it means to face impossible choices. The next few seconds would determine whether my first day as a leader would also be my last. I dove left just as the AK-47 erupted, the bullets tearing through the air where I'd been standing a millisecond before. Henderson's training kicked in immediately. He put 2 rounds center mass into the Taliban leader before the man could adjust his aim. The other 4 fighters spun toward us, abandoning their positions at the windows. What followed was the longest 10 seconds of my life, a close-quarters firefight in a room barely 12 feet wide. The sound was overwhelming, muzzle flashes strobing like lightning, the smell of cordite burning my nostrils. When the shooting stopped, Henderson and I were still standing. They weren't. "Clear!" Henderson called out, his voice shaky but controlled. "Clear!" I responded, though my ears were ringing so badly I could barely hear my own voice. I keyed my radio with trembling fingers. "Williams, this is Collins. Building is secure. Threat neutralized." The response came back immediately. "Outstanding! Enemy fire has ceased across the entire sector. You did it, Collins." But as I looked around that room, at the bodies, at the spent shell casings, at Henderson leaning against the wall trying to catch his breath, I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt like I'd just crossed a line I could never uncross. "You okay?" Henderson asked, noticing my expression. "Yeah," I lied. "Let's get back to the squad." The walk back across that battlefield felt completely different from the sprint we'd made 30 minutes earlier. The silence was almost harder to handle than the gunfire had been. No more bullets whistling overhead. No more shouted orders. No more adrenaline masking the fear. Just the weight of what had happened and what it meant. When we reached the squad's position, I was met with something I'd never experienced before. 11 pairs of eyes looking at me with genuine respect. Not the kind of automatic deference you show a superior officer, but the earned respect that comes from leading people through hell and bringing them out alive. "Damn fine work, Collins," Williams said, clapping me on the shoulder. That was textbook. Martinez was sitting propped against the wall, Field Medic Rodriguez working on his shoulder wound. Despite the pain medication, his eyes were alert and focused on me. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly. It was such a simple question, but it hit me like a truck. How did I feel? Relieved that we were all alive, proud that the plan had worked, terrified that I'd just killed people, overwhelmed by the realization that these men were looking to me for leadership now. "Different," I said finally. Martinez nodded like he understood exactly what I meant. "Leadership changes you. Has to. The person who can make the hard calls and live with the consequences isn't the same person who was bagging groceries 6 months ago." "I didn't ask for this," I said. voicing the thought that had been nagging at me. None of us did, but that's not how it works. He gestured toward the squad, who were checking their weapons and treating minor wounds. Look at them, Collins. Really look. I did. Johnson was actually smiling for the first time since we'd gotten that Dear John letter. Williams was telling the story of our flanking maneuver to anyone who'd listen, his voice full of pride. Henderson was getting his leg properly bandaged, but he kept looking over at me and nodding. They followed you into a firefight, Martinez continued, not because they had to, but because they believed you could get them through it. That's not something you can fake or learn from a manual. That's leadership. The lieutenant finally showed up about 10 minutes later, having coordinated the relief of our position and medical evacuation for Martinez. He was a decent officer, but he'd been back with the radios during the actual fighting. I heard you took initiative today, Private Collins, he said, his tone somewhere between approval and concern. Taking command of a squad in combat is unusual for someone of your rank. Sergeant Martinez was wounded, sir. Someone had to make decisions, and you made good ones. The question is, what happens next? I knew what he was getting at. In the military, there are proper channels, established hierarchies. You don't just promote someone to squad leader because they performed well in one firefight. But something had changed in that building. Something that went beyond rank structure or official protocols. The squad was looking to me now, not because the Army had told them to, but because they'd seen what I could do under pressure. Over the next 2 hours, as we waited for extraction and debriefed the mission, I watched the dynamics of our unit shift in real time. Guys who'd never paid much attention to me before were asking for my opinion on tactics, on routes, on decisions that had nothing to do with the firefight. Henderson pulled me aside just before the helicopters arrived. Listen, Collins, I've been in 3 different squads since I got here. I've seen good leaders and bad ones, and I've seen what happens when you don't have any leadership at all. He looked out across the village where we just fought. What you did today, that wasn't luck. That was instinct. You saw what needed to happen and you made it happen. I was scared the whole time, I admitted. Good. Leaders who aren't scared make stupid decisions. But you were scared and you did the right thing anyway. That's courage. As we loaded onto the extraction birds, Martinez caught my eye one last time. Over the roar of the helicopter rotors, he mouthed something that I almost missed. Welcome to the Brotherhood. I didn't fully understand what he meant then, but I was starting to. Leadership isn't just about giving orders or making tactical decisions. It's about accepting responsibility for other people's lives and finding a way to live with that weight. The flight back to base gave me time to think about everything that had happened. 12 hours ago, I'd been just another soldier following orders. Now, I was someone that other soldiers looked to for answers. If you've ever had a moment where you discovered capabilities you didn't know you had, where circumstances forced you to become someone you never thought you could be, you know what I'm talking about. Drop a comment and let me know what country you're watching this from. I'm curious how universal these moments of unexpected leadership really are. Back at base, word of our firefight had already spread. But as I cleaned my weapon and wrote my after-action report, I realized that the real battle was just beginning. Because now I had to figure out how to be the leader these men thought I was. 3 weeks later, I was still a private first class on paper, but everything else had changed. The official promotion wouldn't come for another month. Military bureaucracy moves slowly, even in a war zone. But Captain Rodriguez had made it clear that I was the squad's acting leader until Martinez recovered from his shoulder surgery back in Germany. You've got natural instincts, Collins, he'd told me during my evaluation. But instincts without experience can get people killed. You need to learn fast. He was right. That firefight had been just the beginning. Over those 3 weeks, I led 17 more patrols through some of the most dangerous territory in Afghanistan. Each one taught me something new about leadership, not the textbook kind they teach in training, but the real-world kind that you learn when lives are on the line. I learned that leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about making decisions with incomplete information and taking responsibility for the consequences. Like the time we had to choose between 2 routes back to base, and I picked the longer one because something felt wrong about the shorter path. We found out later that the shorter route had been mined. I learned that respect has to be earned every single day. Johnson, who'd been struggling since his girlfriend's Dear John letter, had started drinking too much during downtime. Instead of writing him up, I sat with him one night and listened to him talk about his fears, not just about the war, but about what he'd find when he got home. Sometimes leadership means being a counselor, not just a tactician. I learned that the hardest part of command isn't making the tough calls in combat, it's living with them afterward. Every decision I made affected 11 other lives, 11 families back home, who were counting on me to bring their sons, husbands, and brothers back alive. The weight of that responsibility changed how I slept, how I ate, how I thought about everything. But it also made me better at my job. By the end of those 3 weeks, our squad had the highest mission success rate in the company and 0 casualties. The men weren't just following my orders anymore. They were anticipating them, thinking tactically themselves, becoming leaders in their own right. Henderson had developed into an excellent team leader, always thinking 2 steps ahead during patrols. Williams had become my unofficial second in command, the guy I could trust to handle things when I was focused elsewhere. Even Johnson had turned his pain into motivation, becoming one of our most reliable point men. But the real test came on our 18th patrol. We were sweeping a village called Kalat when we got word that a convoy had been hit by an IED about 2 kilometers north of our position. Multiple casualties, possible survivors trapped in the kill zone, and enemy forces moving to finish the job. "Collins, this is Outpost 7, came the radio call from Captain Rodriguez. "We need you to move to grid 417296 and provide immediate assistance to Convoy Bravo. They're taking heavy fire and have wounded personnel who can't move." I looked at my squad. We'd been out for 6 hours already. We were low on ammunition, and we'd be moving into an active firefight with no backup for at least 20 minutes. 6 months ago, I would have been terrified. 3 weeks ago, I would have been uncertain. Now, I saw it clearly. American soldiers were dying, and we were the only unit close enough to help. "Roger, Outpost 7, moving to assist." I turned to my men. They were already checking their weapons and gear without being told. These weren't the same guys who'd looked lost and scared during that first firefight. They'd become soldiers, real soldiers, and they trusted me to lead them through whatever was waiting. "All right, listen up," I said. "We've got Americans down and under fire. This isn't going to be easy, but we've trained for this. We know what we're doing." Henderson stepped forward. "What's the plan, Sergeant?" "Sergeant." He'd called me Sergeant even though my promotion wasn't official yet. But more than that, he'd said it with the kind of confidence that told me he believed I could get us through this. Fast movement to the contact site, establish overwatch positions on the ridgeline, then coordinated assault to break their kill zone. "Williams, you'll take Johnson and Rodriguez and establish the base of fire. Henderson, you're with me and Martinez on the assault element." Wait, Martinez wasn't here. He was still recovering in Germany. For a second, the old uncertainty crept back in. "I mean, Henderson, you're with me and Jackson on the assault element," I corrected, but my voice remained steady. We moved out immediately, covering the 2 kilometers in under 20 minutes. As we approached the ambush site, I could hear the distinctive crack of AK-47s mixed with the heavier reports of American M4s and the machine gun fire from a 50 cal. Through my binoculars, I could see the convoy, 3 Humvees, 1 completely destroyed, 2 others damaged, but still providing cover for the survivors. The Taliban had them pinned from elevated positions on both sides of the road. It was a textbook L-shaped ambush. Exactly the kind of scenario we'd trained for dozens of times. But training and reality are different things, especially when you can see the blood and hear the screams of wounded Americans. "Williams, establish your base of fire on that ridgeline at 2 o'clock. Give me sustained fire on the northern positions when I call for it." "Roger." "Henderson, we're going to approach from the south. Use that wadi for concealment, then assault up the eastern slope. Once we take out their flanking position, the convoy should be able to extract." It worked exactly as planned. But that wasn't because I was some tactical genius. It worked because I'd learned to trust my training, trust my instincts, and most importantly, trust the men I was leading. When we reached the convoy, I found 3 wounded Americans and 1 dead. The surviving soldiers looked at us like we were angels. "How did you know exactly where to hit them?" the convoy's sergeant asked me. "Experience," I said. though that felt strange coming from someone who'd been in country for less than 7 months. But it was true. Every patrol, every firefight, every decision had been building toward this moment. I wasn't the scared kid from Ohio anymore. I was a leader. As we escorted the convoy back to safety, I thought about how much had changed since that first day when Martinez had looked at me and said, "You're up, take my place." I'd taken his place, but I'd also found my own. Leadership isn't something that happens to you. It's something you choose every day in every decision. And sometimes it's something you discover you were capable of all along. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to step up when others were counting on you, let me know in the comments what city or country you're watching from. These moments of unexpected leadership happen everywhere, in every culture, and I'd love to hear from people all over the world who understand what it means to rise to the occasion. 6 months later, I was promoted to staff sergeant and given permanent command of my own squad. But the real promotion had happened that first day when I decided to step into formation and lead the charge. Sometimes the biggest battles we fight are with ourselves, with our fears, our doubts, our assumptions about what we're capable of. And sometimes, when we finally stop fighting those battles and start leading instead, we discover that we were ready all along. We just needed someone to tell us, "You're up."